So, first of all, Hezbollah warning Israel of a war without limits, it says, and it's also threatened Cyprus for apparently aiding Israel. What is the risk of an all-out war right now, in your view?
So I think the first thing that's important to stress is that this is not the first time that psychological warfare has been used between Hezbollah and Israel. So the threats this week have been, and the signaling has been especially intense. But one possible interpretation, and a likely interpretation, is that each party is reminding the other of the costs of an all-out war and reminding that party that the consequences of such an all-out conflict and an expanded total war would far outweigh any benefit. So it is also possible that, as you mentioned, because the US envoy, Amos Hochstein, has been in both Lebanon and Israel in the past week, it's possible that each party is trying to impose pressure on those negotiations to strengthen their hand into whatever settlement might be reached at the border following the end of the conflict. However, I don't think that we can dismiss the signaling this week from the drone footage of Haifa that was released by Hezbollah to Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah's speech, which you mentioned, and also Israel claiming to be fully prepared for war. We can't dismiss all of these things as empty rhetoric or empty threats because they come on the back of some of the most severe escalations that have occurred between the parties since October, that have occurred already in June. So while I think there's a strong chance that this psychological warfare has a deterrent aspect to it, we can't dismiss it as an empty threat. And the reality is that the situation is growing more dangerous on the battlefield as well as on the rhetoric podium.
So as you say, a lot of rhetoric here, perhaps more bark than bite. And that's also because even if the IDF was capable of fighting a new front against Hezbollah after its 8-month war in Gaza, I also doubt it's something that the United States would even allow Israel to do ahead of the election in the US. How do you see this playing out moving forward then? And what type of response are we likely to see from the US to this ratcheting up of tensions?
So I think that it's very important when we're talking about the cross-border clashes between Hezbollah and Israel to center the discussion first and foremost around, is there a permanent ceasefire in Gaza or not? Because it's become very clear since October that Hezbollah refuses to stand down at the border until there is a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. And I think that Hochstein and other parties that are working on the settlement negotiations at the border between Israel and Hezbollah have accepted this point. So in a scenario where we don't have a permanent ceasefire, and as we all know, those talks seem to be stalled at the minute, I think the most likely outcome is that we will see a continuation of what has happened at the border over the past 8 months, and that is a steadily ratcheting up of the intensity of attacks, but without either side wanting it to escalate into a full-scale war. I'm not discounting that possibility entirely. Like, we know that Israel's leadership is facing immense political pressure domestically to do something about the situation with Hezbollah and to allow residents to return to northern Israel. But I think that there are several factors, including the US's reticence for such a war to happen, which would prevent Israel, hopefully, from taking such a drastic decision.